It's finally time to take a look at the new Chronoscommand deck for Premium. I know it's been a long wait because I promised this video on Sunday and then postponed it to Monday, and now it's Wednesday, and depending on where you are in the world, it potentially is already Thursday. So this video has been long coming and we can finally actually make premium content on the channel. So this is going to be a premiere first on all fronts. But before we dive into this video, I want to make something very clear. This deck profile that we're going to talk about in this particular video, I am in no shape or form are suggesting it's going to be a tier 1 deck. Far from it. This is probably going to be a fun deck that you can play that has some neat little interaction and combos, but in the right hands can actually be a pretty solid deck to be reckoned with and potentially be a good contender in the tier 2 meta. But overall, you know who I am. I like to build weird concoctions of deck profiles and the weirdest of strategies. I mean, one of the first deck profiles I did on the channel was an Exodia multi-turn engine with the Zodiac Time Beast archetype right at the end of the Jira. So I'm all too familiar with the spicy techs. But enough about disclaimer, let's dive straight into this Chronoscommand deck profile for Premium, and as an extra bonus I will give you free variants and some extra options that you can try out, because of course the deck isn't set in stone just yet. So here we have the Chronoscommand / Timeleap deck for Premium. Now, as I already explained in the intro, this isn't a top tier deck, nor is it a competitive deck at all. It's probably going to be a tier 2 at most, but it's going to be definitely a fun deck to play with, as there's a lot of interesting combos and a lot of shenanigans you can pull off. Now, one thing I want to address is that I haven't had the chance to actually playtest these cards and see how the deck functions against other completely built decks. This is mainly going off from how combos work, the interactions that are possible, and theory crafting of would be the functioning ratio to make the deck consistent. So that explained, let's dive into the card by card. Now we're going to start off with the main deck itself, so we put the G-Zone to the side. And I'm going to start with the grade 4s and go back to the grade 0s as we go, and then we go into our G-Zone. So first off, for this particular variant, of course it's a Chronoscommand Dragon build, so we're going to play Chronoscommand Dragon, and in total we're going to play 3 copies of him. The reason why I want to play 3 copies is that we want to ride him, and we want him as our main Vanguard, so he stays there, because we have a couple of cards that demand the Chronoscommand name to activate their skills. But at the same time, we have the Croc-Rock Dragon Stride that allows us to go into a grade 4 from deck after a stride attacked, and we want to go into this thing, which allows us to rebuild a new board after we remove them with Croc-Rock Dragon, which allows us to also facilitate a potential multi-attack. So this is a great card to set up our engine. It's also a great card if we go first from Chronojet into this thing, so we can build up a board and keep all our cards in our hand, so we can save our resources. So this is going to be the main core card and the backbone of our main strategy, but you will see the value once we see the entire list. Now, follow up. We have only one type of grade 3, which is Chronojet Dragon. Of course, he is here to facilitate Chronoscommand Dragon, so we can go into him when we go first. And then further than that, it's a force enabler, because we get force markers with our Timeleap shenanigans, so we get more value, vertical base. And it is a rearguard unit, which will come up, as we're going to see with other cards in this list. So 4 copies of Chronojet, and those are all the grade 3s and higher cards in our list. Now, for the grade 2s, we start off with arguably the most important card for this deck, and that is the new Steam Fighter Kalibum. This card allows us and enables all the multi-tech options that this deck provides us. So we want to have this card at all times on the field, as it gives us not only removal on our opponent's side of the field, but the fact that this card spins cards is what's going to enable our time leaping units, which is a bit different than what we're used to with the Elite Four, but it all will become clear. And at the same time, it does have a consistency engine in the sake that we can either get cards from our drop zone, or we can draw into more cards in counters, which is going to be very important because we rely on a lot of key pieces. So Kalibum is going to be your main attacker and the main combo enabler, so you want to be sure that you have always access to this particular card. So followed up for Kalibum, we see the first card that will show us what we're actually are going to try to do, and it's the second grade 2, which is Ever-Changing Gear Peacock. And this card is what shows us why Kalibum is going to be very important, because this card allows us to time leap a unit for free if one of our opponent's rearguard is put into his deck due to one of our card effects, and it only happens if our Vanguard is a Chronoscommand unit. So this is the reason why we want to have Chronoscommand as our Vanguard, and the reason why we want to have Kalibum as our attackers. Because if we have Chronoscommand Dragon on our Vanguard circle, which can be done with Chrono Jet when we go first, or it can be done with Croc Rock Dragon, we can then use Kalibum to spin one of our opponent's units, and then Peacock will automatically time leap one of our units. Now, the great thing about Peacock is, and Kalibum, as you might have noticed, none of them have GB. So this all can happen while our opponent is still at grade 2. So what we can do is we can have these two as our attackers. We can swing with this grade 2. Then we can swing with Kalibum, use the skill, spin one of our opponent's units. Kalibum will bind himself, and now we can put one of our back row grade 1s and time leap it into a grade 2 and then attack again. And it costs us nothing unless we cannot refund the counterblast for Kalibum. So either this combo costs 1 counterblast, or it's completely free because we refund the counterblast and we also draw into a card, which is actually pretty damn good. And the grade 1 will then immediately come back to the field. So if we play grade 1s with unplays effects, this could actually give us even more value. So this is the reason why ever-changing Gear Peacock and Chronoscommand Dragon and Kalibum are going to be very important, as it enables us free multi-attacks. Now, of course, this isn't the only variant, because we also have it in the form of a grade 1, as we have Progress Second Dragon. Now, this card works similar to Gear Peacock. The only difference is that this has a Generation Break 1 condition to it, so you cannot use it in the early game unless we already strode, or we use the Tempest Sphere order card to flip something face up. And the other thing is that this can only time leap itself. So where Gear Peacock allows you to time leap any unit, including himself, this can only time leap itself when we spin one of our units. So what we can do with this particular card is a combo like this, where we have once again the same scenario, where we have Kalibum and Gear Peacock on the front row, and we have this one in the back row, Progress Second Dragon. We can effectively just swing with this grade 2, then swing with these two, and then we can use Kalibum's skill to bind something and spin one of our opponent's field. Then we can use this grade 1 to time leap it into potentially another Kalibum, because it's another grade 2, and then we can either use its skill to turn itself into grade 3, or we can wait with its skill, use this Kalibum again, this card can trigger potentially again, turning maybe another grade 1 into another Kalibum, and then we can do that over and over and over again, until we're done. But at the same time, if we don't want to go into a Kalibum, you can also just time leap this thing immediately into a grade 3 and just keep attacking. Now, the crazy part about this whole setup, where you have this, something like this in the field, you can also have this Peacock behind your Vanguard, and then you can do this whole play where you just time leap everything. So this goes away, this becomes into a new Kalibum, this becomes a grade 3, which is probably going to be your Chrono Jet, but this card is still on the board. So we have another Kalibum here, so we can attack with this Chrono Jet, then attack with this Kalibum, use this effect to once again bind himself, then use the Peacock to time leap this Chrono Jet into a grade 4 Chronoscommand, because we still run these Chronoscommand in our main deck, so that allows us to go from grade 3s into grade 4s as even extra attacks. And don't forget, we have force markers potentially that allows us to get more value. And all these things, all these two time leap effects from these two grade 1s and grade 2s, cost no counterblast, which allows us to basically use Kalibum as a combo enabler, as he costs a counterblast, which can potentially refund itself, which enables you to do all kinds of crazy combos. But on top of this grade 1 also has another effect, which is that if it's on the field, it cannot be put into your deck by the effect of one of your Chronoscommand cards, which means you can just slam this thing in the early game if you know your opponent has no removal, and just be aggressive with just higher columns, or even put it behind your Vanguard if you want to, because the moment that you go first and you ride Chrono Jet and you go into Chronoscommand Dragon, you don't have to be afraid of his skill that then shuffles all your units back, because he will stay on the board. Which is actually really great, because it allows you to keep the presence and make Chronoscommand Dragon skills even better. So that's actually a really nice synergy between these cards as well. And it also can complement with the Croc Rock turn, because he can stay on the board, you bind the side columns, and then go into Chronoscommand Dragon and call new side columns while he stays on the board as well. So this is a nice skill that allows you to keep field presence even if you go into Chronoscommand Dragon's turn, so you can use this very aggressive in the early game as well. Now if we stay onto the Chronoscommand support lineup, we have another great one which works with this, which is Gear Owl of Perching at Nightfall. Now this is our resource engine, as this allows us to refund all the counterblasts that we're going to need. So if we waste too much with Kalibum, or we're going to use it with Clockwork Dragon or any of our strides or potentially Tempest Spheres, this allows us to refund all those counterblasts and also to potentially draw into cards. So this can be this is basically just your generic resource engine. There's not really anything special to think about. It's just that these two counterblasts can definitely matter when games go a bit too long in certain instances. Now, these are the cards for the Chronoscommand archetype. But, as I stated, this is a Chronoscommand / Timeleap deck, so we also need some Timeleap cards. And one of those cards that we're going to run are the History Maker Dragons. So we'll run 3 copies of this to make our engine work even better. So this card enables us to have more consistent multi-tech options, because right now we have the combo with Kalibum, with Gear Peacock, as well as Progress Second Dragon. The only thing is that these 2 cards will not do anything if we don't have access to a Kalibum, because Kalibum is the only way to send cards from our opponents out of the field during the battle phase on a consistent basis. Yes, Chronoscommand Dragon can do that if he hits, but hits is not consistent enough. We need the Kalibum to actually facilitate this. So in order to at least give us more consistent multi-tech options, and also to use the counterblast which we can get back with Nightfall, we play History Maker Dragon, because not only will it achieve us multi-techs, he also allows us to get into a Kalibum on a more consistent basis, because now every single grade 1 in our deck is effectively a Kalibum, which also could attack, which is great for just overall consistency. So that's why History Maker Dragon is going to be a nice addition in this deck, as it just makes the engine as a whole more consistent. And the other support card that we have from the Timeleap engine itself is the 3 copies of TikTok Worker. This is effectively the same deal as with History Maker, only the difference is that this gives us 1 Soul, which is going to be very important because a lot of very powerful cards within Gear Chronicle uses Soul. But more importantly, History Maker Dragon is a grade 2 which needs to attack. This means it somewhat conflicts with the combo that I just explained with these 2 cards, where you have a Gear Peacock in the front rows together with a Kalibum and potentially a Progress Second Dragon in the back row. If you rely on a History Maker Dragon to get to the Kalibum, you clutter somewhat of the combo itself, which can be a bit unpleasant, but still manageable. But with TikTok, you just call it in the back row, and you can still call those other cards in the front row and still get full benefit. So TikTok is a nice way to support it as well. And the reason why these cards are also going to be very good, as we already saw in the opening shot, we run the History Build Dragon, which empowers all our units with Timeleap skills, and spoiler alert, as seen as these two cards also have the Timeleap keyword, they also will empower thanks to History Build Dragon, making them also solid beaters, making all our columns a bit more beefier, which the pure Timeleap deck doesn't have, as they rely on Melon, which doesn't have the Timeleap keyword, which means she has problems going over defensive trigger. Now, we still have some extra cards to go over, as we also run the 3 copies of Tempest Spheres. These are mainly here to give us access to either History Maker Dragon, TikTok Worker, the Gear Owl Perching at Nightfall, and of course the Progress Second Dragon. As in the early game, we can use this to flip one card in our G-Zone face up, and then we have access to our entire GB lineup in the early game. This also allows us to immediately refund the Counterblast with the grade 1 as well, if we need to use the Counterblast for maybe History Maker Dragon, as this does that during the battle phase, which then can combo off nicely with History Maker Dragon as well. And this card is also going to be very nice in combination with History Build Dragon, because History Build Dragon has the passive ability in the G-Zone face up that empowers all our time leaping units with 3k power. So if we went first, and we can immediately go into Chronoscommand Dragon turn while our opponent's still at grade 2, and we could use a Tempest Sphere, that means all our time leap units have plus 3k power. That means this is a 10k beater, which is great against any grade 2. This is going to be a 12k beater, which is also pretty good. This is going to be an 8k unit, which is also pretty nice. And this is also going to be a 12k beater, which means all our columns are going to hit for good numbers. And don't forget, we have a force marker as well. So that can really spiral control. So in that scenario, if you can set this up, you can opt to go for Force 2, because if your opponent's still at grade 2, and you start swinging with double crit units that are 10k, 12k, 10k, 12k, if they don't hit a defensive trigger or their hand is kind of cluttered, that can hurt quite a lot. But we also have some extra tech options which will open up for some spice, because we run 1 copy of Steammate and Danish. This is just like Kalibum, a way to spin cards, only this is during the main phase, as is when she is placed. However, this does open up some very interesting plays with some G-Guard shenanigans, but we will go over that once we take a look at the G-Zone itself. But in dire straits, you can use this during the battle phase as well, because if you can use the History Maker Dragon to time leap maybe a grade 0, you can time leap your Orbitar, for example, into this, which then goes into a rewind effect, because this will spin one of your opponents out of the field, which then can still trigger a Progress Second Dragon or a ever-changing Gear Peacock. That's a potential option. Or you can call this to the field, spin something, then time leap it with either a Gear Peacock or a History Maker Dragon, and at the end of the turn it comes back and you can spin again one of your opponent's units. But you need to be careful, because this card gives your opponent the option to call any card from the deck that's a grade lower. So they can tutor into very good cards, so you need to be very careful when using this. Now, another one-off card in this deck is going to be Chrono Dran, the original GR starter. This is actually a very important card, because this, in combination with your Time Leap engine, allows you to multi-tech even further. This, combined with either Gear Peacock, History Maker Dragon, or TikTok Worker, allows you to get 2 units on the board. You Time Leap this into a grade 1, which can be a beater potentially, and it Time Leaps into a Chrono Jet Dragon, which you can call to the field, and it's going to be a 13k beater with potentially 18k with the Guard Restrict, which is going to be very good for offensive plays. And at the end of the turn, it bounces to your hand, which then gives you Stride Fodder for next turn, or if you have multiple grade 3s and 4s in your hand, you can ride it for another force marker and then discard the rest for striding as well, which is also a nice interaction. But he has even a better option in combination with Croc Rock Dragon, but we will get to that once we talk about the G-Zone units itself. Now, rounding up the rest of the grade 0s, we run the generic V starter Chrono Dran, so this is going to be the starter of the deck. So this, you run this one in your main deck itself. Then for the triggers, we run 4 draw PGs, because why not? They're pretty good. We run 4 of the crits, and we run 4 of the critical that can be discarded as a stride cost, which allows us to be more consistent with striding, as we want to do that every single turn. And at the same time, we much rather want to ride our Chrono Jet Dragons as well as Chronoscommand Dragons, so we don't want to discard them for striding, so we're gonna rely on these crits for that. Then we also run 4 of the new Heal Guardians. They're just too good to not run. At the same time, they're also grade 3, so they also are another stride for their discard. So that means we have 8 triggers that can trigger potentially for our strides or even for Chrono Jet Dragon's superior ride skill, which is honestly pretty good. And then finally, we round off with 3 copies of Steam Battler Uratar. This is going to be the main staple stand trigger for the Time Leap engine, because we can Time Leap this with either Gear Peacock, History Maker Dragon, or TikTok Worker, and it allows us to then draw into more cards, filter our hand, and send cards back to the deck. That sending cards back to the deck is going to be very important because of our final card, which is of course Dark State's Overtrigger. Now, because we can send cards from our hand back into the deck, that means we don't have to worry if we accidentally draw into this thing, because we can just send it back and increase the chance of actually over-triggering this thing during the battle phase or potentially during the damage step. Now, we also have options to send cards from the drop back into the deck, so we can even guard with it, but you will see that once we talk about the G-Zone. So now that we've seen the main deck, let's take a look at the actual G-Zone and see what the main combos are once we go into our late game turn. So first off, it's a Time Leap deck, so we're obviously are running 4 copies of History Build Dragon. Now, this has multiple purposes in this build. First off, it allows us to multi-tack because it enables Time Leap shenanigans, but it is also a good target to flip open with our Tempest Sphere to just empower our units. That's also a very important aspect about this card, to just empower our Gear Peacock, our TikTok Workers, our History Makers, Progress Second Dragon, to just make them stronger during the offensive plays, and allows us to just overwhelm our opponent with good numbers, which usually is not a thing for Time Leap, as their numbers are usually kind of lackluster in most sense, which is really great about this particular card. And it's also a good backup option if we cannot go into our main plays, as it just is a good target to go into anything. If we just have some cards on the field, it allows us to multi-attack with just more attacks for almost no cost. Talking about the actual main plays, we run 2 copies of Interdimensional Dragon, Croc Rock Dragon. Now, this is the reason why this deck actually functions. Now, as I already explained, our main combos are with Gear Peacock and Progress Second Dragon. Now, the thing about these cards is that they only work if we have Chronoscommand Dragon as our Vanguard. Now, I already explained, if you went first, you can use Chronojet's skill to disappear right into a Chronoscommand Dragon, and then you will fulfill the condition for that turn. But after that, you still are back on Chronojet. So, of course, ideally you would just want to write a Chronoscommand Dragon from your hand, but you cannot do that always on a consistent basis, as you only have 2 other copies in your deck that you need to hard draw into. This is where this guy comes into play, because we can just disappear right into a Chronoscommand Dragon from deck, and the great thing about that is that at the end of the turn, you stay on Chronoscommand Dragon. So, from that point onward, you will always have the name that you need for Gear Peacock and Progress Second Dragon. So the following turn, you can basically go into a history build dragon and still be able to proc those 2 cards because you sit on a Chronoscommand Dragon Vanguard name, which is actually really great. And on top of that, this card combos insanely well with Chronoscommand Dragon because his cost forces us to bind 4 of our rearguards into the bind zone, and then we can ride into a new Vanguard. But that means we cannot really put more aggressive attacks from our rearguards. But because Chronoscommand Dragon allows us to call a new field, we can actually use this as a multi-attacker as well from a rearguard's perspective. And if we call just the right pieces, we can potentially even create even more multi-attacks on top of it, because we have all these extra cards that allows us to multi-attack, like calling off a maybe 1 or 2 TikToks over History Maker Dragon, or a potential Gear Peacock with a Kalibum or something like that. That allows us to make even more attacks thanks to Chronoscommand Dragon. And there are 2 extra cards that synergize really well with this card, and those are Chrono Dran and our ushers, because these 2 cards don't specify they need to be time leaps. They only need to be sent from the rearguard circle into the bind zone. And as seen as Croc Rock Dragon is exactly doing that, you can trigger these cards off of Croc Rock Dragon. So with Urutar, you can just filter your hand and draw more cards. But with Chrono Dran, you can actually just multi-tag or create good beaters out of it. Because you can use this effect, then go into Chronoscommand Dragon. Use Chronoscommand Dragon to call field, and if you miss a good attacker, you can resolve Chrono Dran, put it into the soul from the bind zone, and call a Chronojet Dragon from your deck onto the field, attack with it, and then also at the end of the turn, it bounces back and you have your stride cost for next turn. Chrono Dran in combination with this is a very good setup for just a consistent play to keep going even in the following turns. Now beyond that, we also have, surprisingly enough, 2 copies of Interdimensional Dragon Bind Time Dragon. Now you might think to yourself, why in God's name am I actually playing this card? The reason for that is that there aren't actually a lot of other good strides to go into that actually work with Chronoscommand Dragon. You have the Chronoscommand Dragon strides, but they don't really do anything, and the rest are very Chronojet reliant. And yes, we have Chronojet as a Vanguard, but the idea is that we're gonna go into Chronoscommand Dragon and we stay on Chronoscommand Dragon, otherwise our main combos don't work. But the great thing about this particular card is that if our field is almost non-existent, then History Build Dragon isn't going to be a good option. That's where this card actually comes into play, because we only need 1 rearguard to use its skill, and then we can potentially spin our entire opponent's board, and we swing with crit pressure. So if we just want to have a turn where we just want to crit pressure our opponent where they probably have to PG the Vanguard attack, but we're not going to give them any more resources and we're even wiping their board, this can be a potential button that you can press just in those very niche situations. Like you have the room to play it. There is no downside to actually just dedicate the space to it, because besides Croc Rock Dragon and History Build Dragon, there aren't really any good strides to go into in the Chronoscommand Dragon's build. Now for the final main stride besides G-Guardians in the G-Zone, we run Metapulsar How Long. This is one of those other potential options that you want to go into, because we're going to bind a lot of cards, and maybe there's a situation where your board is just not good enough, you cannot go into discard, maybe you don't have the 2 counterblast, or your opponent has an empty board. You can potentially just go into this and use it as a multi-attacker, because it allows you to get anything from your bind zone and call to the field, which can be nice, especially with all the time leap shenanigans with Kalibum and all other things that are happening within this particular deck. Onto the G-Guardians, we run quite a lot of different G-Guardians, because first off we have Time Maiden of Eternity Uluru. This is just a big beefy G-Guardian. There's nothing really to talk about. This is just for big numbers in the case that we need something. Now, and followed up, we run 2 copies of retroactive time in Uluru. This is just a generic G-Guardian that we can use at all times, and this is also the reason how we can spin back the over trigger from the drop zone back into the deck. But this can be used for any card that we're going to need, which is great for versatility for just more consistency's sake, because we're a time leap engine, and that means we need to have all the key cards in our deck to actually make the deck function. Now we also run Pulsar Saver Elishu as a big beefy shield option. We're gonna bind a lot of cards, so this card is going to be online a lot of the times. But sometimes we might not have the Counter Blast for Uluru, then we can rely on the Soul Blast for Elishu because we don't really use a lot of Soul, and we can generate some with TikTok Worker and Chrono Dran as well. We also run one copy of International Dragon Hate Around Dragon. You might think to yourself, wait, you're gonna go to Chronoscommand Dragon. What's the point of this particular card as you're not sitting on Chrono Jet? The thing is, if you went first, that means your opponent is probably going to stride against you, so you're still at Chrono Jet that turn. So you have that window of opportunity to actually use Hate Around in that particular turn. After that turn, once you go into Clockwork Dragon or you just ride Chronoscommand Dragon, then this thing is going to be nothing, but that's why we run a whole plethora of G-Guardians to just have multiple options, and this is one option that can come up in those particular instances. Now, as soon as we don't always have Chrono Jet Dragon, we have an alternative, which is Interdimensional Beast Pandora Chimera. Now, this is arguably a worse head round because your opponent can choose any of their units and it costs a counterblast and it's only a back row, so it doesn't stop a attack. But that's not the case in this particular deck, because the interesting thing about these Chronos Command cards, Gear Peacock doesn't specify that it needs to be spun during your turn. So if I use this while Gear Peacock is on the field, then I can immediately use Gear Peacock to time leap one of my cards, and if I have a Grade 0, maybe an Uratar in the field, I can time leap it into a Danish, which then can spin one of my opponent's units, which is always going to be the attacking unit, because if they swing with an 80k attack, I can use this to just spin the opponent's units in combination with this Grade 1, and it's effectively a different form of Hate Around Dragon. The only difference is that they can call any unit from the deck that's a grade lower, so there's a problem with that sometimes, but in some instances they might not have any good targets, and that can actually be potentially more beneficial than Hate Around Dragon, which just calls the top of card of the deck, which can sometimes also be a better card in some instances. And then the final G-Guardian is Highbrow's Team Raphanna. This once again a much beefier G-Guardian, but her main application is that we're able to tutor out any grade 0 from her deck, which can set up our future plays like TikTok Workers or Tars, but she can also combo very nicely with Pandora Chimera, as we can set up the grade 0 that we need to time leap when we use this in combination with Gear Peacock to get access to the Danish Disruption combo. Now the deck plays out as we already discussed. Basically what we want to do is go into Chronoscommand Dragon at all times, as our main combo cards like Peacock as well as Progress Second Dragon only works if we have a Chronoscommand Vanguard. So in order to do that, we ride Chrono Jet Dragon when we run first, and we can use his skill to go into Chronoscommand Dragon, but the following turn when we're going to stride, we either ride a Chronoscommand Dragon from our hand so it becomes a normal Vanguard, or we can go into Clockwork Dragon, which then forcefully goes into Chronoscommand that we then can access to Peacock as well as Progress Second Dragon. The rest of the game plan is basically just utilizing your Kalibum to activate these two cards to time leap all types of multi-tech shenanigans, and you have History Maker and TikTok Worker that enables more consistent access to your cards as well as more multi-tech shenanigans. In the early game, you want to use a Tempest Sphere to flip open at least one of your history builds, which then allows you to put more numbers on your field. And besides Clockwork Dragon, you can also go into another history build if you have multiple cards in the field and you have multiple timely targets as well. You can go that route. You can also go for a second Clockwork Dragon for another command play where you multi-tech with your rear guards. But in the case where your hand is kind of lacking, you don't really have good timely targets left in your deck, you can always go either into a Bind Time Dragon to pressure with crits, or you can opt to go for How Long, which then gives access to your entire bind zone as a potential multi-tech tool. Now, their big combo that this deck has access to is a 7 attack combo that can effectively cost you 0 counterblast and can also remove your entire opponent's board while you're doing this. The way how this works is effectively you use your Kalibums, you want to have your Gear Peacock in the front row, and you want to have a back row filled with Great Ones. Right now I use the Progress Dragons, but honestly it can be anything, as at least one of them is going to be a Progress second dragon. Now you want to have a history build face up, which you can have in the early game with your Tempest Sphere, and keep in mind you can do this while your opponent is still at grade 2. Now what you can do is effectively attack with this column, which will be 22. Then you can attack with this one, which will be 20 because of the force marker, and you can use its skill, which is counter plus 1. If they have a grade 1, we can send it back. And then once we spin something, we can use Kalibum skill to countercharge as well as draw a card. And then we use this skill to time leap one of our grade 1s into another Kalibum. So this one will go to the bind zone, another Kalibum, and then we use the Kalibum once again to attack for 20, use its skill, counterblast, same riddle, we'll have a grade 1, this will bind itself, draw a card, and then countercharge, use the Peacock again because we spend something. This will then time leap into another Kalibum. Then we can attack for this column. This will be 30k because it's a 10k booster. Then we can use the Kalibum skill again, counterblast 1, we spin a grade 1 of our opponent's out of the field, bind this, draw a card, then we countercharge, and now we're going to use again these skills, but this time, this is the reason why you want to have at least one of this one. You will use this skill of himself to time leap himself into a Kalibum, and you use this one to just time leap into a grade 3. Attack ready, and now you can basically swing with these units, and you can swing with Vanguard, then with Chrono Jet, and then finally with another Kalibum if you want to wrap this up. And you can use the Kalibum skill again if you want to go even further beyond. And that basically allows us to at least unload 7 attacks, because we had the Peacock here, and then for every Kalibum, which are 4, we attacked, which is 6 in total, and then our Vanguard is 7. That's 7 attacks that we unleashed. If our opponent has 3 grade 1s on the back row, it will eventually cost us 0 counterblast to do this, and we draw 3 cards to basically replace the units in the back row. At the end of the turn, if we don't use this Kalibum skill, this will turn back into the grade 1, which then will mean this one go to the deck, so we get the grade 1, and this one will go back to the deck, and we get the grade 2 back, and we're basically set up for next turn. If we use the Kalibum, this grade 1 will not come back, but we have the grade 2 for next turn to basically set up. And because this grade 2 comes back, if we use the G-Guard play and we have the grade 0, we can use the Damage Disruption play as well. Now there is a small adjustment that you can make to the deck, as you can see, we run 3 of the 4 Time Leap Elite Fours. We have TikTok Worker, we have History Maker Dragon, as well as Uratar, but we don't run any Melons. Now the reason why I didn't opt to run Melons is that Melon doesn't really fulfill the same role in this deck as she does in the Time Leap deck, because she allows you to go over and over into an Uratar and then use your Time Leap ability to go back into a Melon and then back into an Uratar, back into a Melon, and you can basically do that to draw into more cards and fix your hand. The thing is, however, you already have multiple front row attackers that you're going to focus on. Your Kalibum and your History Makers are already your main attackers, so there isn't really room for Melon to be used as an attacker. That said, however, you can opt to maybe make room for actually a couple of copies of Melons. You can maybe remove the Countercharger, or maybe make some room with other cards, because she does fulfill a certain role, as she allows you to get access to your TikTok Workers, even your Oratars, or potentially your Chrono Dran, which can set up other future plays. So she does have a function, but I don't really believe that she is as good as she is in the pure Time Leap variant than in this particular build for Chronoscommand Dragon. So that's why I didn't put her in this particular list and opt to go into the TikTok Workers instead of the Steam Main Melons. But maybe you can decide to actually put her into the list by making room with other cards. Now that said, this is the Time Leap Chronoscommand mix build. There is also another version where you add 1 card in the main deck, switch a couple cards in your G-Zone, and you suddenly have an alternate finishing winning play. And the way how you can do this is by replacing 1 Chronoscommand Dragon for a Mystery Flare, because then you can use the Mystery Flare as a finishing turn. Now you can think to yourself, now hold on, how am I supposed to get Mystery Flare active on a consistent basis? Keep in mind, Kalibum binds itself, which is 2 grades. But if you do the whole multi-tech shenanigan combo that I already explained, where you can attack for about 7 times, you will bind a lot more grades because you also will keep the grade 1s that you time leap into the Kalibum stuck into the bind zone because there's no card to go back into. So for every time you resolve Kalibum, that's 3 grades already. And don't forget, if we used Rock Dragon, we're going to bind the entire field as well. So suddenly, you can actually look at a very easy way to get to the condition to have 19 grades in your bind zone thanks to these new additions to the deck. So now it isn't that hard to believe that you can actually get this skill off on potentially the first stride or second stride, depending on if you went first or not. So this is another option, but we can make things even more crazier if we make some adjustment in the G zone. Because if we remove these 2 strides, as we don't really want to rely on these 2 ones, then we can make room for Chronovisor Heritage and another copy of Meta Pulsar How Long. But we also want to make room in our G-Guardian slots for another copy of Pulsar Saver Elishu, which in my opinion is probably going to be the normal Uluru, because what happens if you change these cards from the list is that now you have 2 Zodiac Time Beast strides. You're probably never going to go into these, but these can be your targets for your Tempest Sphere flips, because if you can flip these cards, and you can G-Guardian twice, because now we have 2 G-Guardians that are also ZTBs. Then you have 4 ZTBs in your G-Zone face up, which then allows you to go into Chronovisor Heritage. Now you might think to yourself that's not super consistent, and it definitely is not the most consistent play, but it's an option that you have that can definitely come up in certain plays, because it's not that you just want to stride into Chronovisor Heritage for an extra turn. No. This is for a triple turn tactic, because what you can do in this particular list, if you're able to set this up, in that particular instance, you will also be able to set up for your Mystery Flare. And what you then can do is that you can stride a Rock Dragon, go into a Mystery Flare, use its ability to get an extra turn, and then stride into a Chronovisor Heritage the following turn, and then you get another turn, which then strides back into a Chronovisor Heritage. And if we already drove check the over trigger, keep in mind, all the attacks will get an extra 10k power and an extra critical. That's a lot of extra pressure for free. Now you might think to yourself, how am I supposed to go from this into a stride because I discard my entire hand? The thing is, this is where Chrono Dran becomes MVP. If we stride Rock Dragon while we have Chrono Dran on the field, or at least we get him on the field before we resolve him, then we can bind Chrono Dran, get his skill, get a Chrono Jet onto the field. At the end of the turn, we resolve Mystery Flare, discard our entire hand to get the extra turn, and after we do that, that's when we resolve Chrono Jet and bounce him back to hand. Because both the bounce of Chrono Jet and the discard of this card are at the same moment. So we resolve the discard of our hand first, and then we bounce the Chrono Jet, which means we have at least a grade 3 to discard to go into Chronovisor Heritage if we can set up the 4 ZTBs in our G-Zone as well. So this is basically an extra play that you can make in this particular list if you add this to your main deck and you make some small adjustments in your G-Zone, which doesn't impact your core game plan of Chronoscommand all too much. As the combos, the playstyle is completely the same. The only thing that you miss is the potential of going into Bind Time Dragon, which is very niche and you're probably almost never going to use this, so that's not really anything that hinders you. And you lose one of your 3 copies of Chronoscommand Dragon. That isn't going to be the biggest problem because we have our G-Guard Uluru to send at least 1 back if we have one in a drop zone. Now there is a third deck that we can try, which has the exact same G-Zone as the first build, but has some small adjustments to the main deck, which are effectively turning the deck into a more pure Chronoscommand, but it's also more emphasis on consistency. And what I mean with that is that we're dropping our Time Leap cards, so we are losing the History Makers, as well as the TikTokers, and I personally would also make room for 1 extra card, so we're gonna ditch the Countercharger because we don't have a lot of History Makers anymore, so we are less reliant on Counterblast. And for those 7 slots, we put in 3 Nabus, which gives us guard restrict, as well as more soul charging and draw power. It's the soul and the draw which is very important for this, because we lose the TikTok workers, which means we lose the soul that they generate, and we're going to need the soul because history build may use the soul, a couple of our G Guardians use the soul, so we need the soul for these skills, as well as Chronoscommand Dragon uses also soul. And for the final option, I would recommend to then play 4 copies of Last Gear Dog 8. This gives us so much consistency, as it not only will fetch us our Chrono Jet Dragons, it also allows us to fetch for the new G Guardian heals, because they're also grade 3s. And that means we also can search effectively for G Guardian fodders, because if we are beyond the first grade 3 turn, then they're just used for grade 3 G Guardian searchers, which honestly is still not that bad. So this can be a great card to just increase the consistency of your build, because you still need to be at Chrono Jet at all times to make the deck work. And that's basically everything that I want to cover for this Chronoscommand Premium deck profile. Now, keep in mind, most of the things that I've talked about and the list that I built so far are mainly made with theory crafting in mind. I didn't have the time to actually practice these things and experiment with them in actual matches, so I want to give that on to you guys to experiment with these lists, try to figure out what ratios will work for you and which type of text you want to include in your decks. Because the interesting thing about Gear Chronicle in general is that they are very flexible and very toolboxy, and that's the reason why I also want to put more emphasis on the Timeleap engine, because the Timeleap engine itself makes the deck work like an actual toolbox. So maybe lower certain ratios, include maybe other cards to have a different aspect to the deck, or maybe try to find a different win condition. Like, this is just the start of the Chronoscommand engine within Premium, and I think it has actually a solid shot to be something legit, but I want to give that satisfaction over to you guys. But that said, I'm very curious if you guys enjoyed this type of deck profile. Let me know in the comments down below if you want to see me do more Premium deck profiles for various builds. I'm not gonna go in every Premium list that's ever possible, because there would not be any other content on the channel. Probably, if you guys enjoy this, then I most likely will then pick certain decks and strategies that I find very funny or actually enjoy a lot, and then I will highlight those on the channel itself. So hit me up in the comments down below if you want to see this, and at the same time, maybe suggest a particular deck or a list that you want me to talk about, or maybe give my spin on that particular strategy. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I've been Mr. Timeleap, and I see you guys in the next one!